great-grandfather has been a sexton at the Pilgrim Home Cemetery for 28 years. There's always been a certain intrigue that I've had about cemeteries. And so several years ago we started to look at cemeteries and decided to do a cemetery tour. It was first named Pilgrim's Home Cemetery, but in 1889, when the cemetery was officially dedicated, it was called then Pilgrim Home Cemetery. Communities here that were all started at the same time: Holland, Zeeland, Overijssel, and Friesland, and they were all started by ministers in 1847. So they called themselves pilgrims because they were pilgrims in a foreign land, and so therefore they took the name Pilgrim Home Cemetery. I did this tour in 2006, and at that time I talked to the manager of the, who was Brian Creek at that time, and he said there were 32,000 graves. So it's judging the 3 years, I would say there probably are, you know, between 32,500 and 33,000 graves.
1,000, not 3,200?
No, 33,000
wow.
in the Pilgrim Home Cemetery, because there are 3 cemeteries here.
Right.
And then the Graskop Cemetery also. Now this is Garrett Van Skelven. He died in 1927, and he was, I say, a Civil War veteran, and he was chronicled, he remembered the Holland Fire in 1871, so he wrote all about that, and those who followed him as local historians have used all his material. A well-known professor at Hope College. Hope College now has in the fall, they call the Nykirk Cup for the women, and that is the person who it's named after. Was Mr. Duesberg, and his grave is right over here, and he and Dr. Van Ralde gave him the money to have a newspaper. It was in Dutch, it was the first newspaper, but he also wanted to have a editorial decision on what was going on with the newspaper, and so, but Mr. Duesberg chose to just write as he chose to write, so they had their difficulties for several years. He was writing what he wanted to write about the community, and Van Ralde didn't always agree with that, but he's buried right over here.
It's a pretty fancy gravestone.
Yes, well,
new?
I'm sure that they were added much later, probably when Mrs. Fairbanks died, why they probably added that and made the grave as it is today. But Isaac was located at the Old Wayne Mission, which is on East 147th Street. He's also well known for starting the Methodist Church with Mr. Harrington. Now, I think it's interesting to note the grave here. This, obviously the property became available, so the family which came here from Cambodia, when the Cambodian and the people from the Far East were coming here with churches, were bringing them here during the Vietnam trouble and after the Vietnam War. And this gentleman was buried here in 1988, came from Cambodia, represents one of the people who came in as this community became more diverse with the people from the Far East.
Surprised that spot was available in 1988.
Well, I am too. Suddenly I saw this grave when I started doing this research, and I was surprised too that this was available. But there it was. Bill Vandenberg served under Governor G. Leonard Williams. Williams was a Democrat, and Vandenberg was a Republican, and since that time the Constitution has been changed. We changed the Constitution in the mid-60s, and so now the governor and lieutenant governor are of the same party. But he's the only person who was from Holland who has been the lieutenant governor. The important thing about Bill Vandenberg, I want to mention, Holland in the 50s was quite local. A lot of local industry, successful, but not a lot of it. But because of Bill's political affiliations, he was able to convince the people in Detroit to move to Holland. So, and we'll talk some more about where the Park Davis plant is. We're going to call it Pfizer, we're going to call it other things, but I'll tell you about it a little more when we talk about Mr. Howard. And that's where Dr. Van Ralde was buried there. 2 of his sons, Benjamin DBK, which is Dirk Blickman Kickert Van Ralde, lost his arm in the Civil War. He has the larger stone. Next to him is Benjamin Ralde. Benjamin and Ralde, they were both in the Civil War, and they were in the Civil War, fought at Tebb's Bend, which was one skirmish which Holland Civil War historians have spent a lot of time talking about. It was in Tebbs Bend, Kentucky. They both participated in that skirmish. The first log cabin was located. And I say, this is Pioneer Plot. This is the start of Pioneer Plot. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. But see Vinraldi, here's all the size of it. There used to be the 4 pillars. Now you see the white stove there? That's one of the boundaries of the cabin. But I've not been able to find the other 3. I guess maybe that is one right there.
Markers
That indicated where the cabin actually was. They put the boulder here. This is what it looked like. It's a drawing, obviously. But it was put up in 1917, the boulder. But as to where the markers were, they have been lost.
So the first cabin that was built?
The first cabin for church. This was a church cabin. The Vande Water people were blue-collar people. They worked custodial jobs, furniture jobs, that kind of people. But I'm sure that because he was sexton here, he was allowed to purchase property, and that's where it is. And my parents are buried right behind that bush.